A warm greetings to all our dignitaries, speakers, and guests present today. I, Satya Pulkuri, the Associate Editor of the Forum. I welcome you all to the conference. 1 year of Russia-Ukraine war, battle and geopolitical assessments organized by Indic Researchers Forum. Indic Researchers Forum is an independent think tank that aims at bringing out quality research on geopolitics and security studies through a civilizational perspective. On this wonderful evening, it is an absolute privilege for me to be the host to the many distinguished speakers for what is certain to be an insightful, engaging, and learning experience for all of us involved in this one-day conference. Today, our luminaries will be sharing some remarkable views, opinions, insights on subject areas which are very crucial and relevant to the current world order. With the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war, the global security architecture is being reconstructed significantly. The crisis is a very complicated, highly evolving situation. An appropriate question in the present context is to deliberate on the evolving nature of the warfare and draw military and strategic lessons from analytical viewpoint. At the same time, war has raised questions about the existing world order, the global divide, and the pertinence of multilateralism and multilateral organizations. Therefore, it is imperative for the international community to have a global coordinated approach to end this crisis. On this hopeful note, in the interest of time, I will now proceed briefly to introduce our session chair and exemplary guest for the inaugural session of the conference. I welcome our session chair, Dr. Kishor MS. Dr. Kishor is an associate professor, Department of Politics and International Studies at Pondicherry University. He holds an MPhil and PhD in political science from Hyderabad Central University and completed postdoctoral at the University of Leiden, Netherlands. Erasmus Mundus Fellowship from the European Union. Dr. Kishor was recipient of short-term junior research fellowship from UNHRC, Brookings, Government of Finland. Sir is a senior fellow at Defense Research and Studies in India, analyst at Islamic Theology of Counterterrorism, London, and visiting fellow to AIDIA, Kathmandu. And Dr. Nanda Kishor is the advisory board member of Indic Researchers Forum. Good to have you, sir. And for distinguished keynote address, we have Dr. Ajay Kumar, IAS, and Lieutenant General Raj Shukla. Now, without any further ado, I'll hand over the floor to Nanda Kishor, sir. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Satya. Thank you, Indic Research Forum. It's indeed a pleasure to interact with each one of you. And it's a pleasure to chair this particular session where we have luminaries like Shri Ajay Kumar and Lieutenant General Raj Shukla. Without wasting much time, I've been given the task to introduce the whole theme and then perhaps allow my co-panelists to go ahead and present their view about a very interesting topic and a very important one that the world is going through now. So I've said this before, I'm saying again, the whole event that has happened, which has completed a year now, Putin overestimated his capacity and underestimated Zelensky. Whereas in the case of Zelensky, I think he overestimated himself and the support that he would get from NATO and the West at large. But unfortunately, things have rolled into something else. Now, whatever the plans that were spoken about before, where the special military operation that was supposed to settle, let's say, a one-time attritional trench warfare, has lost, or it has spilled over to something else than what people have anticipated it to be. Because Putin has been signaling a desire to double down on a conflict itself, that he thinks that Western sanctions, which perhaps a lot of scholars have spoken of late, have boomeranged and they have not fetched what they were supposed to. But fortunately or unfortunately, it's been more than a year and there seems to be no prospects for peace at all. And the prospects for peace appear absolutely bleak. Even the UN General Assembly, which overwhelmingly adopted a resolution marking the war's first year, demanding Moscow's withdraw troops as well as stop fighting, with 141 votes in favor and 32 absenting themselves from the process, did not fetch anything. On the other hand, we have countries like China, which want to absolutely maintain, because they have their own problems with the West, more specifically with the United States, which is also given a different dimension altogether. Now, most of the European states have stood by Ukraine, but they also have their limitations. They also have their dependency on Russia, which is very, very clear. And most surprisingly, the Russian economy is doing much, much better. Russian currency is doing much, much better in all these things because of the inevitable diplomacy that's associated with the energy security component. Now, perhaps there are some people who would talk about this as the weakness of the United States or the failing status of the United States and the leadership itself. There are others who say perhaps the geopolitical conundrum is much more complicated than we see them in black and white. Come what may, whatever the cases, Putin seems to be claiming that the Russian economy and the system of governance seems to be proving much more stronger, and he sees this as a moment of testing the control that he has over his country, control about the narrative that he's trying to put up with all the social media today, everything being in favor of Ukraine itself. Now, further reaching up the tensions, if you look in, he essentially spoke about the Sarmat multi-warhead intercontinental ballistic missile that he's going to use this year. That's what Putin has been speaking about, where he's trying to use this as a deterrence. He's also trying to signal at United States saying that I'm capable of doing this one, I'll continue to do. So the eastern city of Bakhmut and Wuhledar and many other places, if you look in, they've all been under heavy shelling to all those things. Unfortunately or fortunately, again, there are Western officials who estimate Russia's military casualties somewhere around to be 200,000. Perhaps that's a very, very high estimate, which might not be the case. But on the other hand, they need to put up this narrative, which is also equally important. Battlefield losses are impossible to verify independently anyway, because soldiers fighting in the front line and the military officials, many cases, might actually spike. And we have also seen how social media has worked, where certain propaganda videos and other things were also shot. More than anything else, what has been an outcome is the tension that we are seeing in the 21st century, which least ever we imagined about. But each one of them is playing. But in whichever way, perhaps this is an opportunity for a lot of scholars. It's an opportunity for the youngsters who are here to listen from extraordinarily learned scholars who are here. One is Shri Ajay Kumar, whom I'll be introducing, followed by Lieutenant General Shukla. Now, I take the pleasure of introducing our guest today, Lieutenant General Raj Shukla in the beginning. He'll go first. He's a PBSM, YSM, SM, ADC retired officer, currently serving as a member of the Union Public Service Commission in a career spanning over 4 decades in the Indian Army. General Shukla has seen extensive service in the field. He commanded an infantry brigade in counterinsurgency operations, the Baramulla division along the line of control in the Kashmir Valley, and the pivot corps along the western borders. An alumnus of the Defence Service Staff College, Wellington, the College of Defence Management, Secunderabad, and the NDC, New Delhi, the general officer has served 2 tenure at the Military Operations Directorate, dealing with doctrines, force structuring, and was Director General, Perspective Planning, addressing issues relating to military futures and force modernization. He has also been a commandant of the Indian Army's prestigious training establishment and think tank, the Army War College. A professional aviator and powerful orator, General Shukla has been abiding interest in strategic military affairs. His author close to 70 articles, publications, and lectured in umpteen number of forums that we have seen. He's also participated in more than 180 talks, seminars in India and abroad. It's indeed a pleasure to have you here, sir, and over to you.
Okay, Shri Yashas Arya, founder and managing director of the Indic Researchers Forum, session chair Dr. Nanda Kishor, many colleagues past and present, fellow panelists Dr. Ajay Kumar, friends, ladies and gentlemen, a very good afternoon. It's wonderful to be in the midst of so many fine minds, distinguished personas, and to be reflecting on a subject, as Dr. Nanda Kishor said, of great topical and strategic interest, the Russia-Ukraine war. So thank you very much, Yashas and the Indic Research Forum, for both the opportunity and the invite. May I begin by saying that Ukraine has indeed been a watershed of many sorts, with huge consequences for the global order and national security. In the allotted time of 15 minutes, allow me to present just a couple of thoughts. Their deeper rationale could be discussed in the Q&A that follows. Now, these thoughts are on a myriad set of issues pertaining to geopolitics, statecraft, and war fighting. They revolve around the conflict in Ukraine and interconnect. So first and foremost, may I say this, that while the purists are in denial, it does seem to me that we are well and truly in the midst of Cold War 2.0. The world should be prepared for the long haul, for a grim geopolitical contest that seems to be unfolding between two opposing political systems, constructs, or worldviews. And India should begin to make necessary adjustments. One, of course, is led by a resurgent China, and the other hemmed by the mighty United States of America. I mean, America and its allies we all know, but China today possibly has Russia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Syria, Pakistan, many countries in Latin America, Africa, West Asia, possibly Turkey on its side. Yesterday's China brokered deal between Saudi Arabia and Iran is equally significant. Now, three of the biggest oil producers, exporters, seem to be in the China pavilion. They are mounting a challenge to the petrodollar, and the prospect of an alternate reserve currency is increasingly growing. The contest is, of course, multifaceted. It's not just military. It is across domains: diplomatic, economic, technological, informational, in the realms of global influence, strategic heft, and military muscle flexing. And as byproducts of this new Cold War, two conflict dyads seem to be emerging. One that is currently playing out in Europe, Ukraine, and the other that is beginning to unfold, even reverberate in the Indo-Pacific. Ukraine, of course, is a huge distraction for the Americans, and it dilutes their focus in the Indo-Pacific. But most significantly, in consequence, territoriality and spheres of influence seem to be back in business. Good old Europe, you may notice, is back to the days of Yalta and World War II. In the Yalta Conference, as all of us would recall, basically Europe was divided up into these two spheres of influence. We are close to doing the same again. And secondly, the instrument of force, which was on the margins for quite a while, people were saying कि अभी लड़ाई नहीं होने वाली and wars will be swift and short. The instrument of force, along with other metrics of hard power, also seems to be returning pretty decisively to the center of the power calculus. Pacifism is on the decline, having overcome their pangs of war guilt. Countries like Germany and Japan are enhancing their military spends, rebuilding their militaries, and expanding inventories. The nuclear paradigm is being revisited sharply and restructured in major ways in terms of arsenal size, nuclear postures, modernization of nuclear triads, etc., etc. What should also really worry us, however, is that Ukraine may just be the first hot war in Cold War 2.0. The war is no longer between Russia and Ukraine alone, if it ever was. The two blocs or axes are getting interlocked in wider, potentially bloody strategic contestation. It does not seem now that the West, on account of all its dithering, all the hesitancies in weapons supply, so on and so forth. Poland, for example, for all the talk, has supplied just 10 out of a possible squadron of 14 tanks to Ukraine. The debates about the fighters are still on when a more decisive Russian air campaign is about to unfold. All that perhaps has made sure that Ukraine will not win, just as China and the other allies seem to be making sure that Russia will not be embarrassed. There is some talk of Chinese beginning to give Russians lethal weapons, and if that happens, the conflict, it does seem, will decisively turn in Russia's favor. The greater threat to Putinian monocracy in Russia, or even to Xi's authoritarianism in China, comes more from internal challenges at home than from military externalities. They seem to be as strong as ever in their seats. In the Indo-Pacific, the prospects for a peaceful unification of Taiwan also seem to be behind us. Since reunification still remains actively on the Xi agenda, such reunification, whenever it occurs, will be violent and surgical. When precisely that will occur will, of course, be a function of PLA's readiness. Xi says 2027, Americans say maybe earlier. An assessment of the IPACOM's deterrent signatures, its questionable intervention capacities, Xi's inclination for risk-taking, and now that Xi has consciously gone loud and proud, and he is committed to restoring China to its greatness, Taiwan is a tiger that he perhaps cannot dismount. What about the other thorn in the flesh of China's inevitable rise to greatness, India? Can there be two tigers on a hill? Well, the military activity in the Western Theater Command indicates there can be only one. Military signatures in the WTC are as worrisome or potent as those in the Eastern Theater Command. Military action along the LAC is as much a possibility as the Taiwan contingency. That's how it appears to me. The profile of the plan in the IOR, the PLA Navy, seems to suggest that we in India could be facing the prospect of a strategic squeeze in the not too distant future. If Taiwan is a thorn in China's design of territorial unification, India is a roadblock in its regional global aspirations. Yet, it is not that a Sino-Indian conflict is inevitable, but it is an equal reality that no weaknesses, chinks in the Indian armor will go unexploited by the PLA and the Chinese. We must plug all such weaknesses resolutely. We have done much in the recent past to fortify our strategic military posture. To name just a few, the establishment of the CDS-DMA, the new normals in our strategic outlook, the fact that defense is coming out of the shadows of foreign policy. It now has a character of its own. It complements foreign policy to lay the basis for a robust statecraft, so on and so forth. Atmanirbharta in defense is more than just self-reliance. It has given a visible fillip to the forces of innovation, energy, and enterprise through the embrace of the private sector and startups. An acknowledgement that national security is so competitive and sophisticated today that the DRDO and DPSUs cannot square up to the challenge on their own. Also, please notice the big lesson from Ukraine. The private sector therein is not only involved in capacity building, but also in day-to-day war fighting. The Starlink's terminal, the Palantir algorithm, which is, bringing about intelligence fusion, battlefield management, and targeting. Ukrainian battalions today, battalion commanders want coders as much as they want ammunition. Microsoft threat identification centers, the Wagner Group and its role in Bakhmut. So all this points to the absolute necessity of getting private sector and startups in. We have begun to do that. We have also begun to factor technologies in our strategic military poise. So there is much to be satisfied about. In comparison to the past, we have indeed taken great strides. But when viewed in the context of the sheer adversity of the emerging strategic environment about India and the rank complexity and sophistication of the China threat, and I would underline this, complexity and sophistication of the China threat, there is a lot of work that still needs to be done. So what is it that we must do? First and foremost, we must make a more determined effort to understand the import, gravity, and sophistication of the China challenge. American think tanks churn out a book every week on some aspect of the China challenge. The strategic commentary in India with regard to this China challenge, I'm afraid, is not deep enough. So if the PLA is a parade ground military or largely social media fluff, as some seem to suggest, we need not worry too much. But if the strategic military challenge that China radiates, and that is my view, if it is long-term, complex, resolute, sophisticated, even nefarious, and I choose each word carefully, we need to do much, much, much more. Were the important gravity of the China challenge to sink in, I'm not saying that we are not aware of it, but the important gravity, were it to sink in, we would do all that we are doing with far greater gati shakti, pace and scale. That's exactly what we need to do. We need to impart far greater momentum to defense endeavors that are already underway, that I pointed out, Atmanirbharta in defense, so on and so forth. We need to increase the pace and scale of our ideation and execution. It is not that we are weak in execution alone. Even in ideation, unfortunately, we lag China. We need to move beyond seminar obeisance. For example, all these startups that Dr. Ajay Kumar set up in the IDEX, they are still waiting to be funded. We need to place orders, and orders, turn many of them into the Bayraktars that Turkey boasts of. If we do all this, we will be able to address the China challenge, which we need to. Now, just a few points about what we need to. All right, let me put it this way. We need to get our grand strategic muscles working harder. I'm not saying that we're not doing it, but given the China threat, take our ambitions beyond the LAC-LC. LAC-LC are hugely important, but there are enough corps commanders and army commanders to take care of them. Beyond that, there is a lot to do, and make some other transitions to complete our national security makeover. Some of them I've pointed out. Now, what are these transitions? The first in the series is to revisit our deterrence posture. Look at the lessons from Ukraine. Long-range precision strike, missiles, long-range drones, strategic bombers. Deterrence capacities focus not on the tower, but the Chinese heartland. Look at how Ukrainian cities are being destroyed, and lack of response capacities from the Ukrainian side have simply turned the battle beyond September in Russia's favor. This is what long-range precision strike and deterrence can do. I'm afraid we are pretty weak in this domain. Create capacities in space, cyber, and EMS. Now, there is a lot to be done here. These are domains of war fighting. They are no longer domains of support. It is, as was evident from Ukraine. It is my view that the first theater command that we need to set up are theater commands in these domains: space command and command of the electromagnetic spectrum. Ukraine has proved that data is the new engine of war. Data, algorithms, and the ability to miniaturize computing power, which is semiconductors, have altered the nature of combat in the front lines of the battle. So we need to invest in artificial intelligence, invest in semiconductors. These are not some airy-fairy things for technologists to do. They are altering the lives of soldiers, sailors, and airmen. So the three services really need to get after them. If we don't create these capacities, we will not have those electronic kill chains. We will not have apps like meta constellations, which are simply revolutionizing battle. For that to begin with, MOD needs to appoint a chief data officer, perhaps a civilian from the private sector who understands data and who can get things like this going, AI, semiconductors, and so on and so forth. We need new talent pipelines. Ukraine is being guided by the talent of Elon Musk, Peter Thiel. And there are a whole lot of reasons to suggest that the same old stuff will not work. So we need a cross-pollinated MOD. The argument is not whether service officers should come in. You need a range of specialists in the MOD if we are to drive the changes that I allude to. The central lesson from Ukraine is precisionary. 44I of dumb munition will be useless. You need to make that munition precise. From javelins to all kinds of missiles to drones, that is the lesson. We need massive investments in semiconductors. There are 8 to 9 startups in India today which have the potential. They simply need the funding. That funding is not coming. And semiconductors, as Ukraine tells you, unless you design your own semiconductors, unless you are plugged into the semiconductor chain, you constantly beg for these very valuable, inputs, and you will not get them in times of crisis. So in concert with the semiconductor mission, we perhaps need to actively give seed to a semiconductor mission. And it is also a wrong belief that, military products in semiconductors, you need to get to the very fine 2 to 3 nanometers. You don't. The bulk of military products come in the 40 to 110 nanometer nanometer size. Dr. Ajay Kumar is an expert on that. We can hear more from him, but we need to invest in this. We need to upgrade our capacities to penetrate the Chinese A2AD wall. Far deeper analysis. We need to do multi-pronged addressing. Look at how underwhelming the Russian air power has been thus far. Fighter platforms, in my view, on their own will not be able to penetrate the Chinese A2AD wall. You need a combination of drones, missiles. We need to strengthen our own AD anti-missile network. There are severe weaknesses in this domain. We need to take a look at this. Given the nature of the national security challenges of tomorrow, we need immediate financial reform. You know, please, it's not a commentary on the IFAs, it's just how times are changing. The IFAs need to become CEOs of modern companies. The processes that they devise need to enable risk-taking, incentivize creativity, encourage failures. They need to move out of the ghost in the room syndrome. That will not work for the kind of capacities that you need to create today in national security and the pace at which you need to create them. Unless financial reform occurs, our military poise will not transform in these emerging, these high-end technologies. We need to revisit our industrial capacities. Today, Ukraine is running short of 155mm RT ammunition, and it is beyond NATO's collective capacities to reimburse it. We saw what happened to Javelin stocks. The West is not able to provide tank spares to all the tanks that they are giving Ukraine. At one time, we were questioning 40i. Ukraine tells us we may need 80i. Are our industrial capacities today in the shape and form to be able to deliver on this? I have my great doubts. They need a revisit and a rejig. Asymmetric balancing. You know, we have to revisit this entire paradigm of defense budgeting. Look at, I can give you 100 examples why within similar budgets, we can get far greater bang for the buck if we do other transformations. If we don't do other transformations, even if we increase our budgets, we will not get a bang for the buck. So we really need to, visit this whole issue of asymmetric balancing. Budgets, they need far deeper study. Civil-military fusion. Today, national security lies at the cusp of civil-military fusion. All capacities are functions of talents and elevated attributes which come from all domains. We have begun to disband many of our silos, but we need to do it more actively. Look what Z says. Please listen to this carefully. He says the contest between superpowers is primarily a contest of talent. Without talent, it is like having a fountain without any water or a tree without roots. And just study what they have done in their 1,000 Talents plan. They are getting Nobel laureates from all over the world to drive PLA programs through the CCP. So we need an entirely new look at the talent that we need to drive our national security structures. Mediocrity will simply not do. And last but not the least, I spoke about the strategic squeeze. Unless we make a vigorous turn to the seas now, we will be in for a strategic squeeze 10 years from now. We simply have to find the funds. In sum, we need to create an instrument of force which is joint, calibrated, ready, technologically enabled, and optimized. Now, it is a set of 5 words, but a huge challenge. We've seen 30 years, we've not been able to become joint, and now the challenge is beyond structural corrections. We need digital jointness, we need cultural transformation. So jointness is assumed an avatar of its own. I spoke about being ready. Look at Russia. It was the 5th largest army in the world, supposed to be second most powerful, and how it unraveled. It proved to be greatly unready, at least in the first part of this campaign. So all these issues, joint, calibrated, ready, they need huge thinking, a large amount of resources, resolve, and so much else. But we simply need to do this. In some, we need to transform the Indian military from one that is focused somewhat narrowly on India's defense to one that can enable power India's rise. A character of a military tasked to secure a $3 trillion economy will be very different from the profile of a military that needs to be structured to secure a $30 trillion economy. So if we are actually going to transit to this Vishwaguru, $3 trillion to $30 trillion, we need to transform our military and do some of the things that I have suggested. That will be all for the moment. Thank you and Jai Hind.
Thank you, sir. I think that was an excellent proposition. That's why we say once a soldier is always a soldier. I think your perspective on India's preparation and lessons for India from this war is an excellent proposition. I'll sum up at the end. I'll not take much time because we also have Ajay Kumar IAS here. I take this opportunity to introduce him as well. Shri Ajay Kumar IAS is an officer of the Indian Administrative Service of the batch of 1985. He served as the Defense Secretary of India. Is an alumnus of IIT Kanpur and the University of Minnesota. He was awarded separate 2 fellowships by the University of Minnesota. Shri Ajay Kumar is known for his in-depth knowledge for technology and was instrumental in path-breaking policy formation such as electronics manufacturing, mobile manufacturing, and also played a very, very important role in decision-making role in Government of India's flagship Digital India program, which was also partially mentioned by Lieutenant General Raj Shukla. He is accredited to scale up the defense exports to approximately 13,000 crores with the introduction of the modern warfare capabilities and disruptive technologies and innovations. He established the IDEX initiative to help create a conducive and cost-effective defense startup ecosystem that fosters innovation and technology development. He was in charge of Project 75I, which is developing next-generation submarines and fighters and laying the groundwork for a future marine and aerospace industrial ecosystem in India. It's indeed a pleasure to have you here, sir. Over to you.
Sir, you're on mute.
Sir, I think you have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Nand Kishor, and thank you very much, Yashash Arya, for inviting me. Thank you, Indic Researchers Forum. I think it's a wonderful initiative. So thank you for taking this forward. And thank you, Lieutenant General Raj Shukla, for, as usual, very erudite and detailed presentation about various issues that are today, of great interest with respect to our own strategic preparedness. As we complete 1 year of the start of the Russia-Ukraine war, the fact of the matter is that this war is still continuing and with no end in sight. The visit of President Biden to Kyiv to mark 1 year of the war underscores US's continued commitment to the war despite mounting costs. The United States spent $50 billion in Ukraine in 2022. The war is estimated to cost German economy over $100 billion in 2023. In 2022, and the number is estimated to be $170 billion in 2023, which is 4% of Germany's GDP. UNHCR reported that as of January 31st, 2023, over 8 million of 44 million Ukrainians have been recorded as refugees across Europe, and more than 5 million are internally displaced. So despite massive scale disruptions and cost, the war is nowhere in sight. The end of the war is nowhere in the sight. This war has been a highly dynamic contest across multiple domains, and both sides have sought to outfit and outmaneuver and out-adapt the other, as is the case in most wars. However, the prolonged nature of the war has resulted in Russian armies depleting manpower. Continuous support by the West has led to a situation that the nuclear threat has become a constant Damocles sword hanging over the world. President Putin has suspended Russian participation in the New START treaty, and the costs of the war are mounting quickly. If we look at the Russian-Ukrainian war, it reflects a hybrid between the traditional Clausewitzian approach and the newer strategy, stressing high-tech maneuverability and battle space transparency. This war reminds us that the prime military capability is competence, and numbers still count, both on the battlefield as well as in the logistics stockpiles. However, these numbers and mass have to be adapted to the new normal of satellites and drone-based transparency and other high-tech capabilities. Combatants have used a wide range of military and non-military ways and means, constantly seeking advantage over the other. There are several learnings that emerge from the war that has happened so far. Let us first look at the tactical and operational lessons from this war. Firstly, the war in Ukraine has shown that big war-fighting platforms such as tanks, warships, and fighter aircraft are more vulnerable than ever to low-cost defensive systems. The Ukrainian forces have used US Stinger and Javelin missiles to attack Russian forces with a devastating effect. The Russian flagship Moskva was sunk with just 2 hits of the Neptune anti-ship cruise missile. A vast majority of Russian tanks attacked in the initial phase of the war were destroyed by cheap, shoulder-fired Ukrainian missiles and drones. Second message that we get is that the artillery is only more lethal when precision-guided munitions are used. Many Russian artillery bombardments fail to penetrate Ukrainian defenses. Even when command and control centers or logistics facilities were hit, the damage was minimal and the facilities were quickly restored. In contrast, the NATO's high mobility artillery rocket system, or HIMARS, which fired GPS-guided projectiles, destroyed Russian ammunition dumps, command posts quite regularly. The third point is that the Ukrainian war, the third lesson from the Ukrainian war is that the drone warfare is a potential game changer with the ability to permanently alter battlefield dynamics. Large drones such as the Turkish Bayraktar have been extremely effective in striking large targets in Ukraine, and even smaller drones have played important role in intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance missions. Fourth lesson that we see is that the effects of modern technology are more salient than ever before. The ability to see and locate enemy positions using satellite imagery effectively rendered the Russia-Ukraine conflict transparent. Data from both expensive, capable geostationary military satellites and low-cost commercial, low-Earth orbit satellites and drones has significantly improved targeting because of combination of space-based capability and pervasive open source data. Pervasive open source data, which is very important. Military forces found it extremely difficult to move around undetected. Now let me move from operational and tactical to the strategic. And there are some very unmissable strategic lessons from this year-long and still continuing war. The first, of course, and the very obvious one is that the myth of a short war in today's world and modern equipment is really a myth. The second, the ability to withstand the ability of Ukraine to withstand the Russian offensive is proof that the power deficit between unevenly matched combatants can be remedied to some degree with the help of allies. Third, the consequences of war in the modern age will not be limited to the battlefield alone. They're bound to spill over into other domains, particularly the economic and political domains, as General Shukla also mentioned. And we see this in this case very, very clearly. Fourth, the battle of the narrative is a key factor. For example, Ukrainian President Zelensky has played a major role in influencing Ukraine's international supporters by directly addressing a wide variety of bodies, ranging from national legislatures to the Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore and the Glastonbury Festival in Southwest England. He has also made extensive use of social media. Zelensky's continuous presence in Western media and political and public fora has been a major factor in influencing attitudes in the United States, Europe, and rest of the world. Both sides have invested considerable resources in a wide variety of communication technologies. Copious amounts of photographs, video, and satellite imagery add credibility to Ukrainians' allegations of war crimes committed by Russian troops against Ukrainian civilians. On the other hand, Russia has adapted its diplomacy and messaging in the global south, claiming that the US and NATO were responsible for Russia's aggression and that Western sanctions are responsible for global economic harm, especially food insecurity. The lesson of this battle is that the narrative is key element of modern warfare, as is the maintenance of legitimacy by the warring parties. Next, China's position in this war has remained steadfast. Beijing continued to provide Moscow rhetorical support and has reaffirmed its actions in Ukraine are just. That Russia's actions in Ukraine are just. Russia, weakened by war and Western sanctions, is beneficial to China. Russia is now increasingly dependent on China. Russia's natural resources provide an expansive strategic backyard that can support China during what is viewed as long-term competition with the United States. Of particular value is the importation of discounted oil that China would take strategic advantage of in the new equation between the two countries. Sixth, the war has galvanized the transatlantic alliance of US and Europe into unity and action. United States and Europe have been highly effective in leveraging each other's diplomatic, economic, and military assets to support Ukraine and constrain Russia. Public opinion too has remained supportive across transatlantic of aiding Ukraine. Non-Western countries like Japan and South Korea have also spoken out in condemnation of Russia's action. The resolve of Western nations to impose sanctions and suffer hardships with their actions against Russia has a message for China for its proposed plans of aggression in Taiwan, if any. While it is still not clear when and how this war is going to come to an end, it is clear that time will have a role to play. Over time, the direct and indirect costs of the war will erode European and American public support for Ukraine. In the United States, support for the war over the last year has dropped with both Republicans and Democrats. On the other side, Putin also knows that a long drawn-out war will seriously undermine public support for the war and drain out the resupply of several already low weapons stockpiles. Therefore, time is a crucial element in the future strategy for the Russia-Ukraine war. Let me conclude finally with a look at the war from the Indian perspective. Since the start of the Russia-Ukraine war on February 24, 2022, India has emphasized the need for diplomacy and dialogue. PM Modi told President Putin that this is not the time for war, and India has consistently maintained this position, and this position has been globally respected. When the war began last year, India was quick to support Ukraine's humanitarian needs. But India has not toed the West line. India has abstained from condemning Moscow's actions at the United Nations, a consistent position that is in line with India's foreign and defense policies. As India's Defense Foreign Minister, Mr. Jaishankar, has said, he is not trying to cater to the demands of other people. It is clear that India is taking independent stand based on its own best interests, which prioritize the country's energy and food security. Most countries have respected this, and which is also reflective of the new respect which India commands globally. Third, the Russia-Ukraine war has also directed India to hasten its pace of Atmanirbharta, as dependence on any country for its defense requirements cannot be in our own national security interests. The decoupling of Indian arms and equipment with Russia is happening truly for the first time, and the war has had an important part to play in this. This may also have long-term benefits for India. The Russia-Ukraine war has also clearly sent a clear message to modernize our arsenal. We find that UAVs are becoming more integrated with our war strategy. We find that our armed forces are in process of using greater amount of artificial intelligence, both in their equipment as well as in their operations and logistics management. Recognizing the new war transparency is also being factored in our own strategy within the country. Finally, and possibly the most important aspect, is that there is an increasing expectation that given India's neutral stand on the Russia-Ukraine war so far, and Prime Minister Modi's stature, and also given India's current presidency of G20, India is in the best position to help end this war. India is in a unique position, being a friend of both Russia and the West. And this places it in a position to mediate a ceasefire and diplomatic talk. And through diplomatic talks, we will wait to see whether that will happen. With these, I conclude. I stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. I think it was an excellent proposition coming from you. Two diverse perspectives, very interesting. When we saw or when we heard Lieutenant General Raj Shukla, it was much more on the lessons for India. On top of it, he was in praise of Russia's way or the Russian way of conducting itself in the war. Whereas in your case, there looked an amount of resistance that the Ukrainians showed. I think that's the balance that we wanted to look into this one. Just to sum up for the benefit of the students from both of them, because we're running short of time for the next session already. Lieutenant General Raj Shukla put up a very, very a strong proposition on what India perhaps has to learn and be prepared for the future. Some of the important points that he spoke about was a grand strategic makeover for India, revisiting the deterrence posture. We also have to buckle up on the long-range precision strikes, create space cyber commands, data algorithms, AI, and the semiconductor. India should invest much more. And India also should get ready to have the A2AD responses in the form of drone, missiles, and many other things. But last prayer that he had was for the government of India for the financial reforms that perhaps will help the forces, because the life of the forces become better when we invest much more on the AI and the semiconductor. As I mentioned, that was a soldier's plea, which perhaps should reach the policy corridors. Um, uh, Ajay Kumar IAS also spoke extensively on quite a few things, and very, very specifically what he mentioned were of greater interest. One is the battle of the narrative, where social media, public diplomacy, continuous presence in the media, how Ukraine perhaps was pitted against Russia by the greater force of the media to everything on a daily basis. Hundreds of narratives were coming up. He was appearing, he was trying to be there in every possible forum. He was available on the news channels to everything. He's talking about the battle of narrative, which we have also heard from people like Vikram Sood, which is very, very important, which we also call as polemic in international relations. He also spoke about another important factor, that is time, which is equally important for every country to consider, and the time that we are going through in the 21st century. Spoke about the support that is waiting for Ukraine in the West, because anything that is in the long run, perhaps slowly and steadily, the support goes down. That's the same case that's happening to Russia as well, when its continuous presence is seen as a financial burden, and also it brings an amount of fatigue in the soldiers if they're in the battlefield constantly. He was very, very positive when it came to the issue of India having a very constant position, a very balanced, robust position. India has been very, very clear in articulating its national interest, and the external affairs minister was very candid when he said, "If you think my position is wrong, which I'm doing for my national interest, I'm ready to take. Let me, if you even call me a culprit." Now, India has also learned how to diversify itself, keeping the national interest in mind. And his plea was also, again, modernizing the arsenal in the need is the need of the hour that he spoke about. And last but not the least, what he spoke about, I think I found it very interesting, was the increased expenditure on the modernization component, which he himself expertises. And he worked throughout in, his career, especially when he was at the helm of affairs. I thank both of you, Lieutenant General Raj Shukla and Shri Ajay Kumar, for an excellent inaugural session. Perhaps it has set a tone for the remaining deliberations. Thanks for your time. I thank Yashas for giving me this opportunity, and all others who are involved in putting up such a great show, in putting up such a great program. Thank you once again.